Hello everyone. In this video, we are going to discuss the different methods which are used for the water conservation. So let's start. Now, what is this water conservation? So as we know that the Indian economy that is dependent primarily on agriculture, which is carried out by the peasants or the farmers. Therefore, the farmer's livelihood that depends upon the sustained crop which is grown on the field. So, for the assured growth of the crop, the sufficient amount of water supplies is required. Because of that, the farmer is dependent on the monsoon. But the drastic climate conditions like floods, that means if the rainfall is exceeding the normal limit, then there will be a flood like situation, or if the rainfall is deficient, then there will be a drought like situation, or if there is a shift in the plant growing zones, that may result in the decline in the crop productivity. And to ensure this, that none of this happens, it is very imperative that the effective provisions for saving the water that is made, because as we know this water is becoming scarce nowadays. So to ensure the sufficient amount for each every one of us, it is our duty to conserve the water. So there are different ways in which the water can be conserved. Out of that, the most familiar methods which are used by the Indian farmers, they are as follows. The first one and the dominant one is the rainwater harvesting. Then the use of plastic, which is black in color, or the organic mulches, that is also a very sustainable method of conserving the water. Then laser leveling, which is primarily a technique with the help of which we can economize the use of the water. Then again, the same method for economizing the amount of water, that is the use of drought tolerant crops. Then rotational grazing, that is for regaining the nutrients for the soil. Then agroforestry, that is also to reduce the erosion as well as the cutting of the banks. Then the floating gardens. Then subsurface irrigation techniques which are used to reduce the losses which occur during the water supply processes. Then sand dams, and there are several other techniques. So one by one we will see all of them. So first one is the use of the black plastic. Now as you can see, this crop region that has been covered with this black plastic, or usually that is the tarpaulin. Now what it ensures, that the soil below this black plastic, that is not exposed to the sunlight, and when it is not exposed to the sunlight, that means the process of evaporation will be hampered, and because of that the moisture which is retained by the soil, that will not be lost to the evaporation process. Other advantages of using this black plastic is that it hinders the path of the wind which may affect the growing crop, and as well as it warms the soil. Other method of covering this crop region, which is known as the organic mulches. Now what it provides, the dead plant which is covering the area that provides the sufficient nutrients during the process of decomposition, and it helps in retaining the moisture of the soil. So that is the first method. And the next method is the land leveling. So from these studies, it has been found out that the unevenness of the soil surface, it has certain impact on the germination and standing and yielding of the crops. Now to avoid this, what does the farmer do? They spend considerable amount of time as well as the resources in leveling their lands properly. However, the traditional methods of leveling the ground, they are cumbersome as well as the time consuming. Now this laser land leveling, that is defined as the leveling of the area within a certain degree of the ground slope, and that is done using a guided laser throughout the entire field. Now it helps in accurate distribution of the water, it helps in saving the water, it helps in conservation of the soil nutrients. So there are numerous advantages of using this laser land leveling as the water conservation method in the irrigation processes. The next one is the growth of the drought tolerant crops. So if we grow such crops which are drought tolerant, for example, we have seen that in the dry areas, for example, in case of India, the Rajasthan area and the Kutch area of the Gujarat, they are native to the arid areas. So they are the arid areas. So if we grow the crops which are native to such areas, they are naturally drought tolerant. Now they work well in the range of the soil, and with relatively very less nutrients they give us the higher yield. So that is also one way to grow the crop when there is not enough supplies. Then the next technique is the rotational grazing. So as you can see, the livestock which is shown here, they are grazing the certain area within the field. So what we do in this rotational grazing, the livestock that is moved between the different fields. Now when they move to different field, it promotes the pasture regrowth, because once the bad or the dead plants, they are consumed, they are taken out, then only the new plants can grow. So it helps in promoting the pasture growth. And the advantages of using this technique is that results in the water absorption and the decrease in the water runoff. And obviously it would become more drought resistant, because the sufficient amount of moisture that will be retained by the soil and sufficient nutrients, they will be going directly into the soil. Just what we need to remember, that the livestock does not overgraze the land, otherwise there will be the chances of the soil erosion. Then the next technique, that is known as the agroforestry. Now as the name itself says, it is a combination of the agriculture and the forests. So agroforestry is a concept in which the trees are used as the part of the landscape within the plant area. Now the advantages what it gives, they are, as the less evaporation will be occurring, because of which the soil and the water runoff, the moisture which was present within the soil and the water which was running onto the field, that will be prevented. Also the leaves and the fruits which will be falling from the trees, they will be acting like as an organic mulch. That means it will be covering the area with the certain leaves, and because of that the nutrients and the moisture of the soil, that will be retained. And in the shade of these trees, the multi-variety crops that can be planted. Then the next technique, that is known as the floating gardens. Now this farming system, that is very popular in the country of the Mexico, and that has been practiced for 1,000 years or more than 1,000 years. That has a very particular name which is known as the chinampas in the Mexico. Now what we do in that case, there are long and narrow patches. As you can see in this is a very narrow patch which is going up to several lengths. So this length, that is usually kept as 30 meter, and this width, that is kept as 5 meter. And on both the side of this patch, the canal is provided. So certain long and narrow patches of the ground, they are bordered by the canals on both the sides. and they are built during the excavation only. The next technique, that is known as the subsurface irrigation. Now that we have already seen that in the different types of the irrigation when we were discussing that. So what it provides, that certain pipes are installed below the ground level so that they directly supply the water to the root zone of the plant. And when the water is flowing through these pipelines below the ground level, that means the evaporation loss, that will be reduced to zero only, and that is also preventing the overuse of the water for the irrigation purpose, which is very pertinent in case of the surface irrigation methods. Then the next method is the use of the sand dams. Now what are these sand dams? So this is a technique which is very ancient and has been thoroughly used in the Indian context, in African context, and in the South America for a number of years, but it is still underutilized. Now what we do in this case, it is a simple concept which can provide the enough drinking water which is clean for gardening and the farming purposes for the extensive periods. Now what we do in this case, a deep trench is excavated and then that is filled with the concrete. So the name might confuse you that it is related with the sand, but this dam part, that is still built with the concrete. So once the concrete is set, that means this trench will be completed. So this trench is filled over time with the rainy water, and these dams are usually located across the small rivers which stop flowing in the dry season because they are also dependent upon the rainfall. Now this trench that can hold up to 2 to 10 million liters of water. So just imagine that how many farmers can it serve. So that's why the potential of the sand dams, that is still underutilized. So the next method of the water conservation, that is the rainwater harvesting, which is the very popular method among the different water conservation techniques. Now this rainwater harvesting, that is simply the collection and storage of the rainwater rather than allowing it to run off. That means we do not want to waste the rainwater which is coming to us naturally. So this rainwater, that is collected from a roof like surface and then it is redirected to a tank which then passes through a cistern and it is being stored in a deep pit, or if it is being allowed naturally, then it may store in the aquifer or a reservoir which is allowed to have the percolated water. So this water which will be seeping down, that is restoring the groundwater, which is also known as the recharging the water level below the ground. So this is one of the simplest and the oldest method of self-supply of the water for the household, residential, and the household scale projects. But for these projects, they are usually financed by the user itself. But for larger systems, for example, for schools, hospitals, and other facility, this cost that is run up by the either the owners or the organization or the government units. So in total, if we look at all of the method, so what we are trying to conserve is the water which we are getting naturally, and that water will only be used when the demand will be rise. So if you look at this, this is the typical rainwater harvesting model in which you can see there is a rainfall which is falling on a particular building. So that water, if we are providing a tank on the rooftop, that water will be stored in that, so that can be supplied to the different water closets and that can be used for the gardening purposes or for the car wash, and the remaining water that will be drained through the cisterns and the pipelines, and it will be stored in deep pit. Now this may recharge the groundwater level also, and if we provide the pump with this deep pit, then this water can be lifted up and can be stored in the tank. Or naturally, this water can also be allowed to percolate into the ground, which may recharge the ground level, and then it can be excavated or it can be taken out through the wells. So that is a typical rainwater harvesting model that works. Now that completes all the types of the rainwater harvesting techniques and the water conservation techniques. In the next video, we will take a look at the different soil characteristics from the irrigation point of view. Thank you.